Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon to the Honorable Miss Teddy Pertamana, our lecturer for the World English course, and all of my friends here. First of all, let's express our gratitude to God for granting us a good health, enabling us to gather for this class. My name is Devi Rahmawati, and my student's number is 21212208. I will be your moderator for today's presentation, which will cover the topic of East Asian Englishes. Before we begin, allow me to introduce our presenters from Group 6. The first is Silva Pujiani, the second one is Devi Rahmawati, the third one is Adinda Fayza Anshari, and the fourth one is Diva Aulia Ilmani, and the last is Tiara Agustine. Now, without further ado, let's start the presentation. The first material will be delivered by myself. The introduction to Englishes in East Asia highlights the increasing role of English across the region, driven by educational reforms and globalization. In East Asia, English is primarily taught as a foreign language, but national varieties are emerging in places like China, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. The key contributors to these trends include large-scale English learning initiatives in China and Korea, and Japan's government-supported efforts to improve English proficiency. Taiwan also plays a significant role with discussion about making English a semi-official language. Historically, English entered the region through different channels, such as trade, colonization, and modernization efforts. The ongoing globalization and intercultural interaction in East Asia ensure that English continues to grow as an essential tool for international communication, and its varieties within the region are expected to evolve further. The next material will be delivered by Tiara. For Tiara, time is yours.
Thank you, moderator. Here I will deliver the material about English in China. Introduction, English in China. The history of the use of English in China began with Chinese Pidgin English in the 1600s. The influence of English in China. After the Cultural Revolution in 1967 until 1976, English is important in education. Chinese Pidgin English is a way for Chinese traders to communicate with English-speaking merchants. Since the two groups didn't share a common language, they created this simplified form of English, blending vocabulary and grammar from both languages. Chinese people moved away from using Pidgin English and Chinglish because they aimed to achieve higher proficiency in standard English for global communicate and economic development. The Pidgin English and Chinglish are seen as limited, informal, and non-standard forms of English. Next slide, please. The current English language situation and educational responses. The current English language situation in China has shifted significantly due to modernization and globalization. The Chinese government now emphasizes learning English as a key skill starting in primary school. After the Cultural Revolution, English has become very important in China. Its growth is mainly driven by globalization, where English is required in business and higher education, emphasized in education from primary school through university. The Chinese government now emphasizes learning English as a key skill starting in primary school. National tests like College English Test or CET and China Public English Test System or PETS assess English proficiency for both students and professionals. Next slide, please. China English. What is China English? China English is a variety of English used by people in China, which is influenced by Chinese culture, language, and ways of thinking. Characteristic of China English. Chinese characteristic of English in the domains of phonology, lexicon, syntax, semantics, pragmatics, and communication styles. China English often reflects Chinese grammar or sentence structure. For example, people might say sentences directly translated from Chinese. Additionally, the pronunciation in China English can sometimes sound different because Chinese speakers might pronounce certain sounds differently than native English speakers. For example, sounds th, like as in think, might be pronounced more like s or t. Example of China English, literal translation from Chinese. For example, I very like this movie. Meanwhile, standard English is I like this movie very much. This happened because in Chinese, the structure is I very like, which is directly translated into English. Pronunciation. Confusion between L and R. For example, far away may be pronounced as far away. That's all from me. The next material will be delivered by Silva. Thank you.
Alright, thank you, Tiara. Here, I would like to explain about the Japanese English. The history of English in Japan started in two eras. The first one is William Adams era, and the second one is Meiji era. In the 1600s, English first entered Japan through William Adams, an English navigator. Adams became advisor to the shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu, marking the first interaction between the English and the Japanese government. However, English did not become widespread during this time due to Japan's policy of isolation or sakoku in the 7th century, which limited interaction with the outside world. In the Meiji period, Japan reopened itself to foreign influence after more than 2 centuries of isolation. Okay, the next is the utilization of English in Japan. The domain of English used in Japan is divided into three sectors. The first one is education. In Japan, English is a mandatory part of the education system from junior high school to university. However, the focus is often on passing exams rather than achieving fluency. The second one is business and technology. In Japan, English is widely used in the business and technology sectors, especially in multinational companies. However, English proficiency varies and companies often provide English training to employees. And the last one is pop culture and media. English is also widely used in Japanese pop culture, including music, fashion, and advertising. However, the use of English in these domains is often decorative and not always grammatically correct. It is perceived as trendy and modern. In this slide, I will talk about the influence of English in Japan. The influence of English in Japan is divided into three, such as social linguistic context, linguistic features, and mixed programs. The first one is social linguistic context. The social linguistic context of English in Japan is divided into two. The first one is English as a foreign language, and the second one is cultural attitudes. In Japan, English is not an official language, but it is taught as major foreign language. Most Japanese students begin studying English from junior high school onwards, although the general population's fluency in English remains limited due to its limited use outside of academic and professional context. Also, English is often associated with modernity, internationalization, and career opportunities in the Japanese culture. The second is linguistic features of Japanese English. English in Japan is affected into two linguistic features. The first one is katakana English, or loanwords. Japanese people often borrow English words into their language, especially in pop culture, advertising, and technology. These loanwords are adapted into two phonetic katakana syllabary, which sometimes change their pronunciation and meaning. Second is pronunciation influences. English pronunciation in Japan is often influenced by the phonological system of Japanese. For instance, Japanese learners of English might have difficulty with sounds that do not exist in their native language, such as the distinction between R and L. And the last is mixed program. In 2008, the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science and Technology, or called MEXT, launched the Japanese with English Abilities Program. This program initiative aimed at improving English language skills among the Japanese public. The program emphasized the importance of mastering English to compete in the global economy while maintaining the Japanese language and cultural identity. I think that's all for me. The next material will be delivered by Adinda.
All right, thank you, Silva. So I'm Adinda Fayza Anshari, and I will explain about Korea English. So let's begin with a brief introduction to Korea English. So the history of English education in Korea goes back over 120 years. However, significant changes occurred in 1997 when English was formally introduced as a subject in primary schools. And this was an important step toward creating a seamless English language teaching program from primary to tertiary education with a strong focus on practical and communicative proficiency. And next one. Let's look at the influence of English in Korea. So one of the key aspects is the college scholastic ability test, which is mandatory for students who want to enter university. And the English section of this test emphasizes communicative competence, including listening, comprehension, and fluency. And since the economic crisis in 1997, English has become even more significant, with many in Korea believing that mastering English is essential for national and also professional competitiveness. And then we're going to explain about Konglish. So Konglish is a unique phenomenon where English blends with elements of the Korean language, and it's creating distinct patterns. So for example, in Konglish, you might hear someone say, "The weather in here is very cold." So they use the preposition in incorrectly. And another example is, "I recommend you a walk along the park," which contains a grammatical errors. So this example show how English is adapted in Korean context. And what makes Konglish interesting is that it often reflects Korean semantic influences rather than simple grammatical errors. So while these sentences don't follow standard English rules, they are usually understandable within Korean society. So in many cases, Konglish doesn't cause communication problems, which show how English has been localized in Korea. And then let's now look at some findings from corpus-based studies on Korean English. So these studies found that models like will and would are far more commonly used than models like shall or should. And another notable pattern is the use of preposition. So for example, in Korean English, the sentence, "The writer is a visiting professor in Korea University." So they use in instead of at, which is a direct influence of the Korean language on prepositional use in English. So I think that's all I can explain. The next topic will be delivered by Diva.
All right, thank you, Adinda, for the explanation. And now I will explain about Taiwan English. So, the story of English in Taiwan is one of change and evolution, shaped by various political influences over the centuries. In the 17th century, European powers like the Dutch and Spanish briefly controlled parts of Taiwan. Although their rule didn't last long, they did attempt to introduce their languages, mainly for religious conversion purposes. However, the impact on the local languages was minimal. And as the time went on, during the Qing dynasty, the Qing government encouraged the use of Chinese languages such as Mandarin, Hokkien, and Hakka as the main means of communication among the people. And this laid the groundwork for a more unified language landscape. Then came the Japanese colonization from 1895 to 1945. And this was a significant period for language in Taiwan, as the Japanese enforced their language as the primary means of instruction in schools and daily life. Local languages more often suppressed, and Japanese become the dominant language, influencing the way people communicated. And after the World War II, the Kuomintang or KMT nationalist government took control. They prioritized Mandarin as the national language, which led to what many describe as a pseudo-monolingual society. And during this time, English began to gain importance, especially with the growing American presence in Taiwan and changes in education policies that encourage learning English. And then next, in the socio-linguistic context, English is viewed as a key to social and economic advancement. Many believe that speaking English can open doors to better jobs and a higher social status. And this belief has fueled a strong demand for private English education, leading to the rise of Buxiban or cram schools, where students go after regular school to improve their English skills. And English has also woven itself into the fabric of everyday life in Taiwan. And you can see it in the media, like English language newspapers and films, as well as in professional settings. For instance, in the healthcare sectors, English often serves as the common language among professionals. And as Taiwan has moved towards globalization, the importance of English has only increased, and the government recognized that proficiency in English is essential for economic growth and global competitiveness. And consequently, they have implemented policies that emphasize English education from an early age. Looking ahead, the Taiwanese government has set an ambitious goal for 2030, which is to make Taiwan a bilingual nation. And this plan includes making English as a compulsory subject in primary schools and integrating it into higher education. And the vision is to promote English medium instruction and enhance English proficiency across the population. And through these changes, English is in Taiwan it continues to grow and reflecting both global influences and local identity. It is a fascinating journey that shows how language can evolve with the society around it. And then the next one, there's linguistic features of Taiwan English. The first one, there is phonology. Phonology influence of Mandarin on stress and intonation patterns, and the substitution of sounds, for example, th as s and the as z. And then the second one, there's vocabulary, incorporation of Mandarin loan words and local expression. And then there's syntax and grammar. It is a direct translation from Mandarin affecting sentence structure. So now I will explain about the examples of Taiwan English. In Taiwan, English often shows the influence of Mandarin Chinese in how people pronounce words, use vocabulary, and structure sentences. First, let's talk about the pronunciation. In Taiwan, some sounds in English can be substituted with others. For instance, the th sound in words like think is often pronounced more like an s. So, think might sound like sink. Similarly, the sound in this can become a z, turning this into this. And another aspect is stress and intonation. Mandarin Chinese uses tones which can affect how English words are stressed. Instead of emphasizing one syllable, as is typical in English, people might pronounce the words more evenly, reflecting the patterns of Mandarin speech. And then the second one is vocabulary and expressions. In Taiwan, English, some expressions from Mandarin are directly translated. For example, instead of saying eat until you are full, you might hear someone say eat yourself full. And also, Taiwan English mixes in local words from Mandarin, especially when discussing Taiwanese culture or food. For example, you might hear someone say, let's go to the night market and have some stinky tofu. Or they might mention, I need to study more for my guo jiao, which means national exam. And then the last one is grammar and syntax. Sometimes the structure of Mandarin can influence how English sentences are formed. For example, instead of asking, where are you going tomorrow? You might hear, you tomorrow go where? Or someone might say, this book I very like, instead of the more standard, like, I really like this book. And those examples show how Taiwan English blends elements of Mandarin with English, creating unique ways of speaking that differ from standard English. And it is a fascinating reflection of Taiwan's rich cultural and linguistic landscape. I think that's enough from me. I will give it back to the moderator.
Thank you, Diva, for the time. As trade and cultural ties in East Asia grow, reliance on English for intercultural communication is expected to rise. Variety of English shaped by each country's unique context will likely evolve and gain recognition, solidifying their status as English continues to be an important language across Asia. For instance, Congolese adapt English to fit the Korean cultural context, influence language structure and usage. China English blends Chinese and English elements, showing how people in China mold the language to suit their cultural and communication needs. In Japan, English has evolved over time, reflecting its adaptation into the Japanese linguistic and cultural landscape. Meanwhile, in Taiwan, English is becoming increasingly significant due to globalization and educational efforts, reshaping the linguistic environment and aiding the country's integration into the global community while maintaining its unique sociolinguistic identity. We have now concluded the presentation. Thank you all for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.